To everyone's shock, the abyssal demon dragon exposed the boy's true power. All he did was let a tiny trace of killing intent slip out, and that alone sent an army of 1,000,000 demons running for their lives. Back then, after Jong-am killed the undefeated abyssal demon dragon, he accidentally absorbed the dragon essence it had gathered over 1,000,000 years. From that moment on, he constantly radiated a suffocating aura of absolute dominance. During the countless years he guarded the human fortress, Jong-am cut down more enemies than anyone could count, and, through endless slaughter, he was eventually reincarnated as a sword. Over the long years, he met countless powerful warriors, and helped them go down in history as heroes. Then he met that one man. Together they roamed the world, and eventually slew the frost dragon. After that, the man founded a kingdom of his own. As for Jong-am, he was enshrined deep within the royal palace as the kingdom's sacred guardian sword. But one day, Jong-am suddenly realized someone was actually swinging him around. When he looked closer, the person holding him was a fat, clumsy-looking guy, and the knights around him were respectfully calling him Your Highness. The prince lifted the divine sword high above his head and shouted, "Great Dragon Slayer sword, grant me your power." Jong-am nearly laughed. Was this idiot insane? Why would he ever lend power to someone like him? When the sword gave no response, the prince started swinging it around like a madman. Then he slipped, fell, and ended up stabbing himself with the blade. By some insane twist of fate, Jong-am took over the prince's dead body. Not long after, the queen came rushing over in excitement, and beside her stood a cold, intimidating knight. The queen pleaded, "Brother, you have to help him. He's your only nephew." The man replied coldly that the only thing he could do was help the kid lose all that extra fat. And just like that, Jong-am was thrown into strict physical training. To speed things up, he wrapped his entire body in mana and forcibly burned away the fat. But the moment his uncle saw it, he froze on the spot. He quickly asked Jong-am, "When did you form a mana heart?" Jong-am answered with a smug look, saying that forming a mana heart was ridiculously easy for him. But his uncle's expression instantly darkened. "Looks like you don't understand what you did wrong. A mana heart is a crude technique only low-level warriors bother learning." As it turned out, after several hundred years, people in this era no longer formed mana hearts. They had all switched to a simpler system called mana locks. After hearing his uncle's explanation, Jong-am was completely unimpressed. Mana locks might make it easier for people to grow stronger, but their ultimate ceiling could never compare to a mana heart. His uncle coldly replied that there were plenty of mercenaries just like Jong-am, fooling themselves into thinking they were no different from the heroes of centuries past. They all believed they could reach the top of the continent with that outdated mana heart method, but every last one of them failed. Some couldn't even defeat the two-chain knight. His uncle continued, "If you want to prove you're right, then try defeating a two-chain knight. If you can do that, I'll honor your mother's wish and become your guardian." Jong-am scoffed. "And having you as my guardian is supposed to be a good thing?" Hearing that, his uncle assumed Jong-am was questioning his strength. So he activated his mana chains and released an overwhelming, bone-chilling pressure. "I am the commander of the entire northern army, and a 4-chain knight who has forged 4 mana rings." The royal knights guarding Jong-am instantly raised their weapons and shouted, "Count Barahard, put down your weapon at once." At that moment, Jong-am finally understood just how powerful his uncle really was. With that level of strength, even in the war-torn era from centuries ago, he would have had a real chance at earning the title of hero. And so, for the next few days, Jong-am was dragged through his uncle's hellish physical training. One day, someone suddenly barged into Jong-am's room. Looking at the arrogant red-haired brat in front of him, Jong-am felt no familiarity at all. The knight Karl quickly reminded him that this was his half-brother, the third prince. The third prince said, "I heard you made a bet with Count Barahard about dueling a two-chain knight. So how about you use me as your opponent?" After saying that, he took his silence as a yes and walked away. Jong-am was speechless. Why were all the descendants of his old friend such weirdos? At that moment, Karl warned Jong-am not to underestimate the third prince. After all, the third prince had been gifted since childhood, and at only 14 years old, he had already become a two-chain knight. Just then, a maid timidly brought over a stack of letters. She said, in a small voice, that all of them were duel invitations addressed to Jong-am. It turned out that after Jong-am made that bet with his uncle about fighting a two-chain knight, everyone the former prince had offended became excited, because now they finally had a legal excuse to beat him up. The next day, while training under his uncle's supervision, Jong-am was surprised to find that his muscles were unusually sore. His uncle frowned and asked, "Didn't you receive magical treatment after training?" Jong-am explained that healing magic would only restore the muscles to their original state. It wouldn't help them truly grow. Hearing that, his uncle was taken aback. He never expected a spoiled brat like Jung Am to have this much determination. Then, his uncle picked up a sword and began teaching Jung Am the kingdom's basic sword techniques. But Jung Am was stunned. How was this supposed to be some ordinary basic sword technique? This was clearly the Dragon Slayer's sword, the very sword art the kingdom's founder had created centuries ago while slaying a dragon. Jung Am couldn't help asking, "Are you sure what you just used is really a sword technique that any low-level knight can learn?" Hearing that, his uncle impatiently explained that no one even knew where this basic sword technique had come from. Knights usually used it to polish their fundamentals before moving on to more advanced sword arts. After listening to him, Jung Am couldn't help laughing. He never expected the Dragon Slayer sword to be treated as some insignificant beginner technique in this era. But the real key to this sword art was infusing the blade with sheer willpower. And people in this age had already abandoned even mana hearts, let alone the idea of pouring their will into a sword. Over the next few days, Jung Am trained his body and practiced swordsmanship every single day. As his body became more agile, his sword movements also grew smoother and more natural. Gradually, Jung Am entered a state of total focus, losing himself completely in the blade. Then, all of a sudden, the wooden sword in his hand snapped in half. The one who broke it was none other than his uncle. In the distance, the training stake had already been scorched black by lightning. His uncle snapped. "You idiot. Why are you training in weather like this? If you'd been holding a real sword just now, you could have been the one struck by lightning." Only then did Jung Am realize he had been focused for far too long. He hadn't even noticed how terrible the weather had become. At that moment, a wave of exhaustion crashed over him, and he collapsed into a powerless sleep. His uncle looked at this nephew, who felt both familiar and completely unfamiliar, then muttered, "Stupid brat." Not long after, Jung Am slowly woke up. Back when he had been a sword, he had no physical limit, so he had never paid attention to how much this body could actually endure. If he lost himself in swinging a sword without restraint, this weak body would break down in no time. At first, Jung Am hadn't expected swinging a sword with his own hands to excite him this much. After all, for countless years, he had always been the sword being wielded by someone else. Now that he could finally hold a sword himself, it was only natural that he had trouble pulling himself out of it. Then, Jung Am discovered that his mana heart had grown much larger than before. Not only could it hold more mana, but his physical condition had also improved because of it. The next day, his uncle told Jung Am to hurry up and choose his duel opponent. Recently, the entire royal capital had been buzzing about this matter, and almost every two-chain knight was going crazy trying to duel Jung Am. Jung Am replied that he had already chosen his two-chain opponent, but his mana heart had only just formed. It would probably be difficult for him to fight a two-chain knight head-on right away, so he might as well warm up by dueling a few one-chain knights first. At that moment, Karl brought over a list. He respectfully said, "Your Highness, I've prepared the list according to your request. These are the one-chain knights who have asked to duel you. However, most of them hold a grudge against your Highness. They may try to injure you under the cover of the duel." Jung Am said there was no need to worry about that at all. After all, his uncle, an absolute monster of a knight, would be serving as the referee. Soon, one challenger was summoned to Jung Am's castle. He was the second son of a baron's family, and several years ago, Jung Am had mocked him for reeking like a country bumpkin. Because of that insult, his entire family had suffered terrible humiliation. So this time, he was determined to make Jung Am pay for what he had done back then. But the moment he saw Jung Am's uncle, he became visibly excited. After all, Count Barohard was the strongest knight on the continent, the very goal every swordsman dreamed of reaching. Soon, Jung Am's duel with him officially began. The challenger leaped into the air with his sword in hand and launched a direct attack at Jung Am. But in Jung Am's eyes, his attack was packed with far too many useless movements. The instant their blades clashed, a strange sound suddenly rang out from Jung Am's sword. Everyone present was stunned, because that sound was sword resonance, something only those who had mastered the highest levels of swordsmanship could achieve. Seeing that, the challenger roared, "Impossible!" and charged at Jung Am with everything he had. Now, completely unhinged, he swung his sword at Jung Am like a madman. Jung Am decided it was time to get a little serious, so he drew out a trace of his former power. In his previous life, he had possessed a very special ability. Every powerful enemy he killed would have their essence sealed inside his blade. And now that his mana heart had grown stronger, he could use it as a medium to draw out a small amount of the demon dragon's essence. As Jung Am charged forward like a god of death, wrapped in an aura of destruction, his uncle immediately sensed something was wrong and rushed after him. The next second, he swung his sword hard and knocked Jung Am back. The royal knights instantly surrounded him and shouted, "Count Berahard, do you understand what you just did? With that action, you could be charged with high treason." But Jung Am spoke up, saying he had asked his uncle to do it, because before the duel began, he had already told his uncle one thing. If it ever looked like he was about to kill his opponent, his uncle had to stop him. The next day, his uncle came to Jung Am and demanded to know what that evil power from before really was. Jung Am calmly replied that he was simply staying true to the nature of a sword. But that answer clearly didn't convince his uncle, because his uncle had seen it clearly. Jung Am's previous strike had been filled with endless killing intent. So he said solemnly, "The path I walk is the path of victory, not the path of justice. I don't consider myself a good man, but your sword goes too far. If your killing intent grows too strong, you may no longer be able to tell friend from foe." From then on, his uncle declared that he would keep a close eye on Jung Am and see whether he would be swallowed by the demon inside him. For the next 3 days, Jung Am continued dueling the same challenger from before. During that time, his control over the demon dragon's power improved dramatically. After the duel ended, Jung Am asked a maid to bring over a treasure chest. He said to the challenger, "I heard I did some terrible things to you in the past. I know this can't undo the harm your family suffered, but please give this to your father." Meanwhile, everyone outside was watching this duel, hoping to see Jung Am get beaten black and blue by the challenger. But when that challenger walked out of Jung Am's castle, everyone heard him say, "Honestly, I don't think the first prince is as terrible as the rumors say." Over the next few days, the challengers who faced Jung Am all said the same thing. The first prince was actually a good person. But when everyone else saw this, they all came to the same conclusion. The first prince must have threatened them into saying it. After some time, Jung Am finally welcomed his last opponent. Carl warned him that this person was on a completely different level compared to the previous challengers. She was Arwen, a probationary knight of Iron Lion, the strongest knight order in the kingdom. And Jung Am also learned something from the maid. The bastard he used to be had actually harassed Arwen in the past. Arwen said coldly, "It's been a while, Your Highness. You haven't changed at all." Hearing that, Jung Am instinctively tried to repair his image. "Actually, I've changed a lot." But in Arwen's ears, that only sounded like provocation and an excuse. So before the duel even began, Arwen had already taken her stance, fully prepared to beat Jung Am down. The next second, she shot toward him like an arrow released from a bowstring. The moment they clashed, Jung Am realized that Arwen's mana far surpassed all the opponents before her. In the battle that followed, Jung Am was completely suppressed by her and forced to keep retreating. Facing Arwen's fierce assault, Jung Am decided he could no longer hold back. He immediately drew on the demon dragon's essence. The intense killing intent made cold sweat break out across Arwen's body, and after they exchanged blows, she realized Jung Am's strength had suddenly surged by a huge margin. Soon, the two of them were locked in another brutal clash. But even after fighting for a long time, neither side could secure a victory. Seeing this, his uncle declared that today's duel would be paused and continued tomorrow. Jung Am acted regretful and said, "What a shame. I could easily go another 100 rounds." Arwen refused to back down. "Really? I don't feel tired at all either." Both of them were so exhausted they could barely stand. Yet they kept talking tough like two stubborn trash talkers, each claiming they could still keep fighting. Over the next few days, every duel between them ended in a draw. Before the final round began, Jung Am suddenly said he had something to say. Arwen immediately cut him off. "Don't tell me you're trying to apologize now. I won't forgive you." Jung Am waved his hand. "That's not what I meant. I'm saying, since we've been fighting this hard, shouldn't there be a prize? How about the loser grants the winner one wish? Even if it means kneeling down and apologizing, they have to do it." Arwen said that as a knight loyal to the royal family, she would never dare show such disrespect to His Highness. But then she changed her tone. "However, within the limits Your Highness allows, I believe I'm qualified to exercise the winner's right." With that, the two of them launched into another fierce exchange. But very quickly, Arwen realized something was wrong. Just now, she had nearly been cut down by Jung Am's sword, and she could feel it. The killing intent coming from Jung Am had grown far stronger than ever before. In the battle that followed, Arwen fought desperately to hold on. But in the end, Jung Am still cut the sword from her hand in half. She stared at the broken blade, in disbelief, unable to accept that she had lost to that useless prince. Jung Am walked up to her with his sword in hand and calmly said, "Now I'll exercise the winner's right. My wish is this. From now on, Arwen, you belong to me. Hearing that, Arwen's face filled with rage. So what you wanted was my body. Looks like you're still the same shameless scumbag. Realizing she had misunderstood, Jeonnam quickly explained. You've got it wrong. What I truly want is the potential and future of the person named Arwen. Because I need a knight. A knight who belongs only to me. After hearing those words, Arwen froze in shock. She had already become a probationary knight of the Iron Lion Knight Order. But because she was too beautiful, no one had ever truly treated her as a knight. Even after she defeated every other probationary knight, she still failed to become a real knight in everyone's eyes. But the person standing in front of her had recognized her. He said he wanted her potential and her future. So Arwen solemnly told Jeonnam that he had to promise her one thing. He must treat her as a knight, not as a woman. After receiving Jeonnam's promise, she dropped to one knee and pledged her loyalty to him. After several months of brutal training, Jeonnam finally got rid of all that excess fat. Now, at last, his appearance truly matched the title of the kingdom's first prince. Then Jeonnam noticed the maid beside him trembling. There was also a glaring scar across her neck. After asking carefully, he learned that this was yet another masterpiece left behind by the bastard he used to be. To ease the tension, Jeonnam asked the maid for her name, but the moment he heard the surname Demacia, he was shocked. After 10,000 years, he never expected to hear that name again. Back in the era when humanity was weak and plundered by countless powerful races, 5 heroes had appeared and led mankind to rise. Among them, the one who slew the giant king was the iron-blooded sword, Demacia. And back when that woman used Jeonnam to cut down enemies, she would often get carried away and curse like crazy. Even now, just remembering it made Jeonnam's ears ring. He never imagined that after so many years he would meet Demacia's descendant again. Unfortunately, her family had clearly declined and hadn't produced anyone truly powerful. So Jeonnam decided that once he had free time, he would train her properly and make sure that powerful bloodline didn't go to waste. Then a man stepped forward, bowed to Jeonnam, and said, Bernardo of the Elex family offers his highest respect to the kingdom's first prince. Your Highness, you must have suffered quite a lot recently. Otherwise, how could you have lost so much weight so suddenly? After entering the banquet, Bernardo quickly sensed that something was wrong. Normally, by this point, that bastard prince should have already been blackout drunk and flirting with noble women everywhere. So why did his presence feel completely different now? Just then, a drunken noble walked over. With a disgusting grin, he said, I heard your highness has taken that flower of the Iron Lion under your wing. She already looks stunning in armor. I wonder how beautiful she must be underneath it. When the nobles around him heard that, they immediately began whispering among themselves. Jeonnam suddenly asked him, Do you have any siblings? The man froze for a moment. Doesn't your highness already know? I have a younger brother. The moment he finished speaking, Jeonnam punched him straight in the face. Then your family line won't end with you. After saying that, Jeonnam stomped hard on the man's most sensitive spot. Jeonnam coldly declared, From this moment on, your younger brother will replace you as the new heir of your family. Still not satisfied, Jeonnam grabbed him by the collar and lifted him up, then punched him several more times until his face swelled up like a balloon. It took the man a long while to regain his senses. The man trembled and asked, Your Highness, weren't we friends? Why would you do this to me? Hearing that, Jeonnam grew even angrier. Do you think I'm the same kind of scumbag as you? You actually dared to insult my knight right in front of me. The nobles around them were completely stunned. Though they couldn't help thinking, weren't you the biggest scumbag of them all before? Soon, Jeonnam beat the man unconscious on the spot. The nobles' sons nearby were already frozen in terror. What in the world had happened to this lunatic recently? Then Jeonnam directly ordered Bernardo to summon the royal knights. Afraid he might get beaten too, Bernardo immediately ran off after hearing the order. Jeonnam turned back to the group of noble sons and ordered all the women present to leave first. Someone tried to sneak out with the crowd, but Jeonnam suddenly said, I believe I said women. If you don't mind becoming one, then go ahead and leave. Hearing that, everyone instinctively clenched their legs together. Jeonnam swept his cold gaze over them. You bastards failed to formally kneel and salute me after I arrived. You even dared to mock my knight to my face. That's a direct provocation against royal authority. Right after that, under Jeonnam's command, the royal knights arrested all 14 noble sons. And this incident quickly caught the king's attention. The king snapped, Do you have any idea what you're doing? Behind these people stand 14 powerful families. As a member of the royal family, are you trying to cut ties with the nobles entirely? Jeonnam didn't care about the king's warning at all. because these people were hopeless trash who had already been rejected even within their own families. He also said that he had already written letters to their siblings. Most likely, those siblings wouldn't hate the royal family at all. Instead, they would thank the crown for removing their useless heirs. After handling that matter, Jong-am prepared to help Demacia awaken her bloodline. But Demacia thought he had other intentions and said timidly, "Your Highness, I'm not even that pretty. Please have mercy and let me go." However, when Jong-am saw her talent clearly, he was instantly shocked. Not only did she possess S-rank swordsmanship talent, but her two traits, Butcher and War Maniac, were almost exactly the same as her ancestors. That made Jong-am wonder whether it was really safe to unleash those two insane traits. Still, her deeply rooted slave mentality was something he could make use of first. So, Jong-am solemnly ordered Demacia to swear loyalty to him. Hearing that, Demacia asked in confusion what he meant. Jong-am said calmly, "I'm making you my knight. Right here, right now, we'll form a vow between master and servant." After hearing his explanation, Demacia dropped to her knees with a thud. "Your Highness, I'm only a lowly maid. How could I possibly become a noble knight?" Jong-am replied, "If you become my knight, then I'll take responsibility for your family as well. If you want, I can bring them into the royal capital, so you can meet them whenever you wish." Hearing that, Demacia immediately agreed with joy, and Jong-am knew very well that a lunatic was about to wake up. Once this matter spread, it quickly caused a major stir outside. People were saying that the first prince had not only forced a knight into loyalty through shady methods, but now he had even turned a maid who had never held a sword into his personal knight. Everyone started guessing that he was just using the title of personal knight as an excuse to build a harem. Even the queen rushed over in a hurry. She said with a pleased look, "It seems my son has finally reached the age where he's interested in women. This time, I'll definitely find you a suitable partner." After saying that, she completely ignored Jong-am's opinion and went off to take action with great excitement. Soon, Jong-am began helping Demacia awaken her bloodline. With his assistance, she quickly sensed mana. However, this method consumed far too much of Jong-am's mana. That deeply moved Demacia, and the way she looked at Jong-am no longer carried the same fear as before. But for some reason, Jong-am felt that her current gaze actually sent a chill down his spine. After that, Jong-am brought Demacia to the training ground. Seeing this, his uncle walked over and asked what Jong-am was doing. Jong-am asked back, "Haven't you heard the rumors lately? I'm going to make her a knight." His uncle instantly flew into a rage. "Does the title of knight mean so little to you?" But the very next second, he was shocked to discover that this girl displayed extraordinary talent the first time she swung a sword. Sensing something was wrong, Jong-am quickly warned his uncle not to covet his subordinate. But his uncle said Jong-am was only a beginner who had trained for a few months and couldn't teach her much at all. To make his uncle back off, Jong-am decided to stop hiding his strength. A strange and powerful demon dragon aura instantly wrapped around him. That aura made his uncle feel an inexplicable chill. His own strength stood at the peak of the continent. So why did this boy make him feel afraid? But his uncle didn't know that the Jong-am standing here was no longer the useless prince from before. In his previous life, Jong-am's true body had been an extremely powerful divine sword. Every powerful enemy he killed had their essence sealed inside his blade. As Jong-am drew on the demon dragon's essence, the killing intent spilling from him actually made even his uncle shiver. Jong-am said coldly, "I'll say this one more time, she's mine. I don't like anyone taking what belongs to me." His uncle replied that one excellent knight was worth 100 soldiers, and that child might one day save the lives of thousands of soldiers. After hearing that, Jong-am understood why his uncle was so fixated on Demacia. After all, as the commander of the northern border, his uncle had watched far too many people die in war. If one future peak fighter could be added to their side, countless soldiers might survive. But Jong-am still refused without caring. He had originally been nothing but a sword, so grand ideals like that couldn't persuade him. At that moment, Demacia stepped forward on her own and made her stance clear. She said, solemnly, "Honorable Count, my life and loyalty already belong entirely to His Highness. From now on, my sword will belong only to him as well." Hearing Demacia's answer, Jong-am was extremely satisfied. Then he turned to his uncle and said, "Your original goal was to help me lose weight, wasn't it? I've already gone from a fat prince to what I am now. If you still want to come see me in the future, then please stop interfering with my people and my affairs." Left with no choice, his uncle could only agree. After all, no matter what, he couldn't openly defy an order from the royal family. But after that, his uncle still came to the training ground and quietly watched Demacia train from the side. Clearly, he still couldn't give up on such a rare talent, but there was nothing he could do about it, so he could only struggle with himself in silence. Before long, a strange sound suddenly rang out from the wooden sword in Demasia's hand. Seeing that, John Am couldn't help clapping in praise. Not bad. I didn't expect you to achieve sword resonance this quickly. But his uncle, standing nearby, looked extremely displeased. He questioned John Am, asking why he had taught her the mana heart when mana chains were clearly the mainstream of this era. Hearing that, John Am's expression turned cold. No one in this world understands the power of the mana heart better than I do. So-called mana chains are nothing but a shortcut. They can never lead someone to the peak. Then, John Am directly ordered the knights to escort his uncle out. Demacia, standing beside him, asked, "Your Highness, why was the Count so upset?" John Am replied calmly, "Because the people of this era have forgotten what a true mana heart is. Otherwise, they wouldn't have thrown it away like an old pair of shoes. Soon, you'll understand the true power of the mana heart." The next day, his uncle came to find him again. "Since you claim the mana heart is stronger than mana chains, then prove it to me. I'll only use the mana chain of one ring. If you can make me take even half a step back, you win." John Am said that kind of fight was too boring. Instead, the loser should grant the winner one wish. His uncle didn't believe he could lose, but he agreed anyway. He even said that if John Am wanted to learn the family's secret techniques, he would allow it. Right after that, John Am charged toward him with a wooden sword in hand. But his uncle only tilted his head slightly and dodged with ease. Then, every wooden sword strike John Am unleashed was calmly deflected one after another. His uncle said coldly, "Is this all you have? Hurry up and use your mana heart to fight me." Seeing this, John Am decided there was no point in testing him any further. There was no denying it. His uncle was truly powerful. Without question, he stood at the peak of the continent. John Am suddenly asked, "Do none of you find it strange? 400 years ago, countless knights who mastered the mana heart killed monsters so powerful they almost defied reason. Then, a technique that was simply easier to understand appeared. And just like that, you all treated the memories of those great knights like garbage. Now, I'll show you what a true mana heart really is." For knights who possessed a mana heart, the honor they gained from crossing blades with powerful opponents, and the pride they earned by tempering their own will, would eventually condense into power and gather within the knight's sword. That was the true power of the mana heart. Martial spirit him. His uncle, however, didn't take it seriously. Mana chains possessed the ability to pierce through mana, and against an ordinary mana heart, that was a fatal advantage. But what his uncle didn't know was that John Am had sparred hundreds of times during training, and through martial spirit him, he had gained a power called the sparring him. In the battle that followed, his uncle couldn't pierce through John Am's mana heart at all. Realizing something was wrong, his uncle decided to end the fight quickly. He gathered his mana and prepared to launch an attack himself. Although John Am struggled under his uncle's fierce assault, he still slowly explained why people in this era no longer valued the mana heart. It was because the knights of 400 years ago had made one serious mistake. They had been too powerful, and they had left no enemies behind for their descendants. To later generations, those so-called evil dragons and giants sounded more like absurd legends than real history. Although a few people with mana hearts could still form martial spirit hymns, their achievements were usually only things like defeating 100 soldiers. That was nowhere near the level of myths and heroes. But Jonam was different. In his previous life, he had been a divine sword that crossed countless ages and killed more powerful enemies than anyone could count. And the essence of those powerful beings had all been forcibly sealed inside his blade. The achievements he gained from defeating them alone were enough to form a terrifying martial spirit hymn. The moment Jung Am activated the Dragon Slayer hymn, his entire body was wrapped in a violent surge of dark mana. With his current physical condition, he could only unleash 1/16 of the Dragon Slayer hymn's true power. But the instant they clashed, his uncle immediately realized something was wrong. He was shocked to discover that his own mana was being devoured. The next moment, a violent force came crashing in, and John Am was blasted backward. John Am couldn't help saying, "Didn't he say you would only use the mana from one ring? That power didn't exactly look like one ring to me." Hearing that, his uncle felt ashamed. When he sensed a lethal threat just now, he had instinctively used the full mana of all 4 rings. Even so, he had still lost. Even the sword in his hand had been cut in half. Although forcibly using the Dragon Slayer hymn caused a serious backlash to Jonam's body, it also strengthened his physique quite a bit. In particular, the power of the sparring hymn had improved significantly, and the sparring hymn was currently the only martial spirit hymn that wouldn't cause any negative effects to his body. At that moment, Demacia noticed that John Am had woken up and said with tearful eyes, After Your Highness collapsed, everything fell into chaos. The queen scolded the count for hours and still refused to stop. Jong-am was secretly enjoying the thought of his uncle getting chewed out. But then Demacia told him that before leaving, his uncle had ordered her to notify him the moment Jong-am woke up. Jong-am said he still needed to rest for a while longer, so there was no need to notify his uncle yet, because he had realized that his greatest problem right now was that reality and the memories of his past were starting to blur together. If the boundary of reality ever completely collapsed, Jong-am would probably turn into a madman. He had finally become human, yet now he was trapped by the memories of his past as a sword. After that, Jong-am told Demacia about the achievements of her ancestor. He told her that as long as she devoted herself to training, she could inherit her ancestor's martial spirit hymn. After all, Demacia's two traits, butcher and war maniac, were almost exactly the same as that crazy woman's. Then, Jong-am asked Demacia what she wanted to do after becoming stronger. Hearing that question, Demacia became so excited that she started stammering. After taking a while to calm down, she said firmly, "I want to become your highness's sword and live for your highness from now on." The next moment, an invisible surge of mana seemed to rise from her body. Then, that mana slowly flowed into Jong-am's mana heart. As it turned out, Demacia's loyalty to Jong-am had created the hymn of obedience. From now on, the higher her achievements became, the stronger Jong-am's martial spirit hymn would grow as well. Just as Jong-am was getting bored, he suddenly noticed that his uncle had arrived at the palace. But to his surprise, his uncle, who had always been cold and arrogant, actually apologized to him first. Hearing his uncle apologize, Jong-am actually felt a little guilty. After all, the reason he had been recovering these past few days wasn't because he had been injured in their fight. The real reason was that his current body simply couldn't withstand the demon dragon's essence. And he had already heard from the queen that because of this incident, his uncle's position had also been affected. His uncle said in a heavy voice, "Before our fight, we agreed that the loser would grant the winner one wish unconditionally. Even if you ask for my arm or my eyes, I'll give them to you." Looking at his uncle's current state, Jong-am knew this was bad. He hadn't expected that previous battle to hit him this hard. At this rate, his uncle might end up consumed by his inner demons. So Jong-am decided not to ask for anything too extreme. He simply asked his uncle to take him out for a trip, since he had never left the royal capital after being reborn as a human. But his uncle, completely unaware of what Jong-am meant, said that he had already advised the king to lift Jong-am's confinement. Jong-am explained, "That's not what I mean. I'm not talking about strolling around somewhere nearby. I want to go somewhere farther away." Hearing that, his uncle looked troubled. After all, taking the kingdom's heir around was no small matter. But in the end, he still agreed. "I'll need some time to arrange the trip. Once the schedule is set, I'll contact you." After his uncle left, Jong-am noticed Carl looking at him with a strange expression. Carl said in surprise, "I thought your highness would ask for something far more unreasonable. After all, the count's promise is a rare opportunity." Jong-am replied calmly, "I just thought that stubborn old man looked a little pitiful. I didn't feel like hurting him any further." Hearing that, Carl couldn't help laughing out loud. "Your highness really has changed a lot lately." Just then, Demacia walked over with a letter in her hand. Jong-am looked closely and realized it was a letter from Arwen, the flower of the Iron Lion. In the letter, she mentioned that her recent training had gone well, and that she would soon be able to come to Jong-am's side. 1 week later, his uncle led Jong-am out with an impressive procession. Going outside for the first time as a human, Jong-am excitedly asked his uncle where they were headed. As it turned out, their destination was Allen City. It was the royal family's largest weapon production base, rich in ore and home to a large number of highly skilled craftsmen. More than half of the royal family's weapons came from Allen City. Now that Jong-am's strength had improved considerably, it was about time he found a sword that truly belonged to him. At first, Jong-am had planned to choose a sword from the royal treasury. Unfortunately, before he was reborn into this body, the prince's reputation had been so disgraceful that when the king heard about it, he strictly forbade Jong-am from touching any weapons. Their plan was to spend 3 days reaching Allen City, then visit Iron Lion Castle for 2 days before returning. Although Jong-am was interested in both places, the long journey quickly became boring. So he passed the time by training his mana heart. But when Jong-am began absorbing mana from the outside world, he was shocked to discover that his mana heart had grown much larger than before. As it turned out, forcibly using the demon dragon's essence earlier had pushed Jong-am's body beyond human limits. And as his mana heart grew larger, his physique underwent a complete transformation. Jong-am could now contain even more of his former power, and the two all-seeing abilities, Third Eye and Third Ear, had been fully awakened. He could now sharply perceive every movement around him. Not long after, the group successfully arrived at Allen City. The moment Jong-am entered the Allen family's castle, his eyes were drawn to the swords displayed all around him. Although the room was filled with gorgeous weapons, they were clearly only decorations and weren't suited for actual combat. Jong-am said, "I heard the Blacksmith Guild is located in your territory. I'd like to take a look." On the way there, Allen carefully explained to Jong-am that most blacksmiths were stubborn people and they had fiery tempers. Allen was genuinely terrified. After all, Jong-am, the spoiled prince, had once been infamous for his awful personality. And those blacksmiths all had explosive tempers. If they angered the prince, Allen might lose his position as lord entirely. Soon, they arrived at the Blacksmith Guild. The instant Jong-am stepped inside, a wave of heat rushed toward him. But what truly shocked him wasn't the environment. It was the sharp blade that an old blacksmith was hammering like a madman, because that sword was Jong-am's body from his previous life. Under the old blacksmith's hammer, the blade that had been corroded by time was slowly beginning to glow again. Staring at the scene before him, Jong-am froze in place. He had only planned to casually choose a good sword, but he never expected to encounter his own former body. At that moment, Demacia gently wiped the sweat from Jong-am's face with a handkerchief. She asked with concern, "Your Highness, are you all right? You've been standing there for a very long time." Before Jong-am could answer, a noble led the other craftsmen over and said respectfully, "We humble servants offer our highest respect to His Highness, the First Prince." Seeing this, Allen introduced the man to Jong-am. His name was Zack, and he was the head of the Blacksmith Guild. After hearing that, Jong-am once again turned his gaze toward the abyssal demon sword. But Zack, eager to flatter him, deliberately shouted at the old blacksmith, "You fool, don't you know that His Highness the Prince has arrived? Stop at once and pay your respects." Hearing that, Jong-am immediately covered Zack's mouth and warned him that if he didn't want to die, he had better stop disturbing the blacksmith. This was the critical moment in reforging the abyssal demon sword. One wrong move, and all the work would be ruined. At that moment, Jong-am also noticed the troubled expressions on the blacksmiths nearby. Not far away, unfinished weapons were still lying on the forging tables. Clearly, Zack had dragged them away in the middle of their work. So Jong-am reminded them, "If you want your furnace fires to go out, then go ahead and keep standing here." Hearing that, the blacksmiths immediately rushed back to their workstations. After that, Jong-am learned something from Allen. For the past 6 months, that old blacksmith had been repeating the process of forging the sword and melting it back down. Jong-am couldn't help asking, was he melting and reforging it because each attempt failed? Allen said that was probably not the reason. After all, that old blacksmith was the last master craftsman left in the kingdom, and every weapon he had forged so far was flawless in Allen's eyes. On top of that, to forge this sword, the old blacksmith had barely rested at all over the past month. For the next few days, Jong-am kept watching the old blacksmith. But the man continued working as if no one else existed, repeating the same process over and over again. In the end, Jong-am could only let out a sigh. He had hoped to see the sword completed before leaving, but now it seemed there wouldn't be enough time. But the next day, just as Jong-am was preparing to leave, Allen came running over excitedly and reported that the old blacksmith had finally completed the sword. When Jong-am hurried to the Blacksmith Guild, he saw the old blacksmith standing beneath the setting sun, quietly admiring his masterpiece. Then the old blacksmith offered the sword up with both hands. The instant Jong-am grasped the body from his previous life, a long-lost sense of familiarity surged through him. Then Jong-am looked at the sword and said to the old blacksmith, "Since you're its creator, you should be the one to name it." The old blacksmith said slowly, "How about the Twilight Sword? For me, this is the Twilight. But for your Highness, it's a dawn filled with hope." Hearing that, Jong-am laughed with satisfaction. I didn't expect a blacksmith to be this good with words. But the next moment, the old blacksmith collapsed weakly to the ground, as if every last bit of strength had left his body. Looking at the blacksmith before him, Jong-am immediately ordered the knights, "Go tell my uncle to delay our departure by 1 day. I want to stay here tonight." That night, Jong-am stayed by the old blacksmith's bedside, listening as the dying man told him the story of the broken sword. The old blacksmith said, "When I was forging the Twilight Sword, I could never make it truly take shape. But that day, when your Highness stood behind me, it was as if the sword was guided by fate itself and finally became complete." Hearing that, Jong-am leaned down and told the old blacksmith his true identity. The old man's expression instantly filled with shock. But soon, he calmed down and kept murmuring softly, No wonder, no wonder. Then, the old blacksmith raised his trembling hand. Your Highness, please let me hold the Twilight Sword one more time. Hearing that, John quickly placed the sword in his hand. With the last of his strength, the old blacksmith said, "May this sword become as great as you." The next day, Alan came to John with a magic sword treasured by his family. Clearly, he had realized the value of the Twilight Sword and wanted to trade this magic sword for it. But before Alan could even speak, John said first, "The Twilight Sword forged with that master blacksmith's life's work is already a precious gift. I didn't expect you to offer me another magic sword as well. From you, I can truly see the Allen family's loyalty to the royal family." Hearing that, Alan wanted to kick himself on the spot. Not only had he failed to get the master craftsman's sword back, but he had also ended up giving away his family's treasured sword too. After leaving Allen Castle, his uncle ordered the knights to pick up the pace. Seeing this, John couldn't help feeling confused. "Uncle, is there something urgent going on? Now that I think about it, I barely saw you at all while we were in Allen City." His uncle said, "His Majesty gave me a separate task. We plan to reach Iron Lion Castle tonight, so stop riding in the carriage. Horseback will be much faster." John said he didn't know how to ride at all. After all, he had originally been nothing but a sword. How was he supposed to have ridden a horse before? The road to Iron Lion Castle after that was nothing short of a struggle. Somehow, the group finally reached their destination after taking twice as long as expected. The moment John saw the knights of the Iron Lion family, he felt killing intent, rushing straight toward him. After all, his knight, Arwen, was the untouchable flower of this place. That was why these knights were staring at John with eyes full of envy, jealousy, and resentment. Then, Arwen walked up to John dropped to one knee, and saluted him. "I've been counting the days, waiting only to meet your Highness again." When the other knights saw this, the fury in their eyes burned even hotter. At that moment, John sharply noticed that something was wrong with Demacia behind him. Just like her ancestor, she possessed the two insane traits, Butcher and War Maniac, and her loyalty toward John had become almost pathological. The knight's attitude toward John had clearly angered Demacia. Thankfully, after John warned her, she finally snapped back to her senses. Right after that, John turned his gaze toward the knights and invited them to spar at the training ground. It was the perfect chance to test the Twilight Sword he had just obtained. John said, "I hear the swordsmanship of the Iron Lion Knight Order is known as the strongest in the kingdom. Which one of you will show me the sword of the Iron Lion?" But after hearing that, the knights only looked at one another. No one dared to accept. After all, John was the kingdom's first heir. If anything happened to him, the entire Iron Lion Knight Order would be held responsible. Seeing their hesitation, John said, "I swear on the honor of the royal family that no one will be held responsible for this spar. Even with that, none of you dare step forward? Looks like the Iron Lions of this civilized kingdom are all bark and no bite." Soon, one of them was angered by John words and stepped forward. "I'm Daima of the Dannert family. I'm here to test your Highness's swordsmanship." Then he charged toward John with fierce momentum. But, the instant both sides clashed with mana, Daima was sent flying by a single strike from John. The surrounding knights broke into a cold sweat. Daima was already considered one of the stronger ones among them, yet he hadn't even lasted a single move. After that, the knights who challenged John one after another were all defeated, but John wasn't satisfied, because he knew the truly powerful formal knights hadn't made a move yet. So to provoke them, John deliberately said to Arwen, "When I return to the royal capital, you're coming with me." Hearing that, Arwen immediately agreed, with visible joy. John's provocation soon drew out a silver-haired knight. The silver-haired knight said, "I heard your Highness enjoys making wagers. If I defeat your Highness," as he spoke, his gaze shifted toward Arwen, behind John. John said coldly, "I reject your proposal. Arwen isn't a prize I can casually give or take. If you truly want a wager, then defeat me, and this sword will be yours." Seeing this, the silver-haired knight was deeply shocked, because that was a mana sword, something only a handful of swordmasters could possess. Arwen quickly stepped forward and tried to stop him. "Your Highness, that sword is far too precious." But John said that Arwen herself was worth more than 1,000 times that sword. Meanwhile, the silver-haired knight already seemed to believe the mana sword was as good as his. He warned, "I advise your Highness to be careful. I'm not only a formal knight of the Iron Lion Knight Order, but I'm also about to break through to a 3-ring mana chain." John scoffed. "You said all that, but in the end, you're still just a 2-ring mana chain knight." The silver-haired knight then took out his own sword, This sword is the 17th blade crafted by the master craftsman. If I lose, it will belong to your highness." When Jung-am heard that the sword had also been made by the old blacksmith, he drew the Twilight Sword as well. "Perfect. This sword of mine was also made by that master craftsman," the silver-haired knight said doubtfully. "I've never heard of the master craftsman forging this sword." Jung-am replied calmly. "This is the final work he completed just a few days ago. I'm sure you'll hear the news soon." At that, the silver-haired knight no longer doubted him. He activated his mana chains and prepared for battle. He said in a low voice, "I can tell your highness has chosen the wrong path. You actually went down the ancient path of forming a mana heart." Jung-am immediately reminded Demacia, who had also formed a mana heart. This is the true power of the mana heart. Meanwhile, the Count of Iron Lion was blaming Jung-am's uncle. "If you, as the commander of the northern border, had supported the first prince even a little back then, his highness wouldn't be so isolated now. And now you come asking me to support the first prince? Isn't that a little too late?" Hearing that, his uncle didn't argue. Instead, he fell into deep thought. In his eyes, the original Jung-am had truly been a complete scumbag. Back then, all he had done was scold him a little as an elder. And Jung-am had drawn a sword and swung it at him. Afterward, he had even sent a bottle of poisoned wine, pretending it was an apology gift. After drinking all of that poisoned wine, his uncle had completely given up on this nephew. But recently, he had realized that the bastard had truly changed. At the very least, the current Jung-am was completely different from the one in the past. So his uncle sincerely asked the Count of Iron Lion to give the first prince a chance. The Count of Iron Lion frowned. "I honestly can't tell whether you changed or his highness changed." Just then, a subordinate suddenly rushed in and reported that the first prince had started fighting the Iron Lion Knight Order. On the way to the training ground, the Count of Iron Lion reassured him. The Iron Lion Knight Order is strictly disciplined. Even in a spar, they would never injure his highness. But his uncle replied, "Right now you shouldn't be worrying about the prince. You should be worrying about whether your knights are injured." Before the Count of Iron Lion could understand what that meant, a figure suddenly came crashing down in front of them. When they looked closely, it was an elite knight from the Iron Lion Knight Order, and the knights around them were cheering. "Amazing! His highness won again." Seeing this, his uncle said smugly, "Didn't I tell you? The ones you should worry about are your knights." After several consecutive battles, Jung-am finally recalled that long-lost feeling from his previous life. Then he activated a trait called hyperfocus. At that moment, Jung-am felt everything around him fall into an unnatural silence, as if nothing existed except the enemies standing before him. After a long while, every knight in the Iron Lion Knight Order had been knocked to the ground by Jung-am. Their attitude toward him also completely changed, from hostility at first to outright admiration. And during this process, Jung-am's martial spirit hymn, the sparring hymn, evolved into the duel hymn. Soon, the group left Iron Lion Castle and prepared to return to the royal capital. Before leaving, Jung-am specifically told the Count of Iron Lion to keep what happened today a secret. After all, the third prince who had always hated Jung-am still thought he was the same useless trash from before. That would make it perfect for messing with him during their upcoming duel. On the way back, Jung-am began thinking about the strengths and weaknesses of mana chains and mana hearts. He had noticed that most members of the Iron Lion Knight Order had swordsmanship talent no higher than B rank. Back in the past, that level of talent would have barely qualified someone as an intermediate swordsman at best. Yet in this era, they had already reached the level of advanced swordsmen at such a young age. Clearly, mana chains had greatly raised the floor for ordinary people. But precisely because of that, mana chains had also completely locked their ceiling. Someone like his uncle, if he had formed a mana heart in the past, would have had a real chance to become a hero. Just then, Jung-am suddenly noticed his uncle walking up to him. It was obvious that his uncle was extremely satisfied with Jung-am's performance back at Iron Lion Castle. Seeing his usually cold uncle act like this, Jung-am almost wondered if he had fallen under an illusion. Then, his uncle said, solemnly, "I, Berahard, as a Count of the Kingdom and Commander of the Northern Border, hereby declare my loyalty to His Highness, the First Prince." Hearing that, Jung-am was so shocked he couldn't speak. He had finally become human after being a sword, and he hadn't even had time to enjoy life properly. No matter how he looked at it, his uncle clearly intended to support him in taking the throne. His uncle's public allegiance caused quite a stir in the royal capital, and the number of knights under Jung-am's command instantly increased. Before he even realized it, Jung-am had already stepped into the center of the royal power struggle. Then the third prince stormed over in a rage. He gritted his teeth and said, "You did a pretty good job pretending to be an idiot before. Fine, you managed to lose weight recently, but now even the Northern Count, who commands heavy military forces, has declared loyalty to you." Looking at the third prince's helpless rage, Jong-am suddenly realized that his uncle's public support wasn't entirely a bad thing. Soon, the royal banquet began. Every guest in attendance was a powerful noble who held authority and controlled territory within the kingdom. And among them was a rather mysterious woman. When Jong-am appeared at the royal banquet, the nobles immediately swarmed around him with flattery, praising his dignified appearance and saying he truly lived up to the title of first prince. But Jong-am only sneered at them, thinking these so-called nobles were nothing but a joke, because he could sense that almost all of them carried the trait of hidden malice. It was a quality possessed by villains who stole the fruits of others' labor and trampled on human life. Just thinking about those disgusting traits made Jong-am feel sick. Fortunately, not every noble was like that. Jong-am noticed a familiar figure in the corner. It was Tyro, the man who had crossed swords with him before. Tyro's talent was decent, and he possessed a rare knightly character. He was also one of the few people who hadn't been corrupted by noble power. So Jong-am immediately decided that he would train this man properly in the future and make him a pillar of the kingdom. Just then, a guard knight suddenly shouted, "The envoy of the Braun Empire, Marquis Montpellier, has arrived." The moment Jong-am heard the name Braun Empire, he froze. While Jong-am was still stunned, Marquis Montpellier had already walked up beside him and smiled. "Your Highness, it's truly been a long time." Looking at the man before him, Jong-am's eyes instantly filled with hatred. Before his reincarnation, Jong-am and his close friend, the founder of this kingdom, had spent a long time resisting the Braun Empire's invasion. That empire had left pain and scars on this kingdom that could never be erased. Before he realized it, Jong-am's killing intent surged violently, and he was already on the verge of making a move. But at that moment, a noble suddenly tripped and fell in front of him. The red wine in the noble's glass spilled perfectly onto Jong-am. Seeing this, the noble hurried forward to apologize. But when he leaned closer, he whispered, "Your Highness, you're losing your composure. That man is still an envoy of the Braun Empire. Please calm down." Hearing that, Jong-am temporarily suppressed the urge to attack. After all, the kingdom's overall strength was still below the Braun Empire's. Starting a war recklessly would only cause more casualties. Meanwhile, Marquis Montpellier and the nobles saw Jong-am's hostile expression and assumed that the careless noble had angered him by spilling wine on him. The atmosphere became so oppressive that no one dared to make a sound. Only then did Jong-am slowly stand up and leave. "I'll go change my clothes. Don't mind me. Continue the banquet." At that moment, Carl handed him a towel, and Jong-am took the chance to ask who that old noble was. From Carl, he learned that the man was Marquis Feld. So not every noble in the kingdom had rotted away. Thanks to Marquis Feld's intervention, Jong-am finally managed to cool his head. After Jong-am left, his uncle soon came to find him. Marquis Feld said your condition looked wrong, as if you were about to cause trouble at any moment. At first, I thought he was talking nonsense, but now that I see you, he was right. Hearing his uncle's words, Jong-am said he simply couldn't understand it. Why could an envoy from the hostile Braun Empire swagger around the heart of the kingdom and flaunt his power? And why were those nobles bowing and scraping before him, showing him respect and sincerity they hadn't even shown the royal family? Jong-am couldn't help asking when the kingdom had become like this. Listening to Jong-am's complaints and questions, his uncle looked deeply helpless. At first, the kingdom had resisted the empire's invasion with absolute determination. Countless nobles and knights had stepped forward to fight back. But as time passed, the empire's power continued to grow, and the gap between the two sides grew wider and wider. Hearing that, Jong-am suddenly froze. Could the kingdom have fallen to this state because it had lost that thing? The reason the kingdom had once been able to resist such a massive empire was the heroic stories and mythic deeds that had accumulated since its founding. Those stories had become the kingdom's unity and will, but the people of this era had abandoned the mana heart and chased the easier path of mana chains instead. And with that, the powerful will that once supported the kingdom had also collapsed. Realizing this, Jong-am suddenly said that he had changed his mind. His uncle asked in confusion what he meant. Jong-am said calmly, "From now on, I'm going to become king. I want to see what this kingdom will become in my hands." Hearing that, his uncle was visibly stunned. After all, not long ago, Jong-am had been strongly resisting the idea. After that, Jong-am and his uncle returned to the banquet once again, and Jong-am sharply noticed that the kingdom's nobles treated him, the royal heir, with even less respect than they showed the imperial envoy. Their greetings were nothing more than empty formalities. For some reason, Jung Am suddenly thought of his old friend from his previous life, the man who had risen from a remote countryside and eventually founded this kingdom. That man hadn't exactly been righteous, but whenever danger came, he was always the first to step in front of the crowd. The next moment, a strange and extraordinary wave of mana began radiating from Jung Am. This was the effect of activating the King's Hymn. Compared to the destruction-filled Dragon Slayer hymn, the King's Hymn was only hero tier, not myth tier. But without question, no hymn was more suited to the current situation, because it could forge powerful unity. Under its influence, the nobles' eyes filled with shock and reverence. Then, almost at the same time, they bowed to Jung Am again. Just as Jung Am was feeling pleased with the result, he suddenly sensed a terrifying surge of energy behind him. When Jung Am turned around, he discovered that the source of that power was a mysterious woman wearing a cloak. She slowly removed her disguise, revealing the features of an elf. She said softly, "I never expected that after all these years, someone would still be able to use the King's Hymn." Looking at that familiar face, Jung Am's expression changed dramatically. Several hundred years had passed, yet this crazy woman was still alive. And why was she here? His teammate from his previous life had somehow become his fiancé in this life. At the banquet, Jung Am unexpectedly discovered Glenn, who had come as an elven envoy. And from the moment they met, Glenn showed tremendous interest in Jung Am. She had even taken the initiative to request a marriage alliance to strengthen the bond between the two kingdoms. But cold sweat broke out across Jung Am's forehead, because he knew exactly how dangerous Glenn was. To most people, elves symbolized nobility and kindness. They would never harm weaker lives without reason. But Jung Am, who had once been a demon sword, had encountered far too many elves. He knew very well that they simply used their beauty as a weapon. And Glenn wasn't even an ordinary high elf. 400 years ago, when they had still been teammates, she had already been one of the strongest beings of that era. Most importantly, Glenn had been almost obsessively fascinated with Jung Am. Back then, Jung Am's wielder had been the founder of this kingdom, but she had always wanted to claim Jung Am for herself. Thinking of that, Jung Am felt a chill run down his back. After all, Glenn was extremely familiar with the King's Hymn he had just used. Glenn narrowed her eyes slightly. "Strange. Have we met before? Why do I feel something so familiar from you?" Hearing that, Jung Am quickly shook his head and denied it, saying this was his first time ever seeing an elf. But Glenn quietly watched him for a moment, then judged that he was lying. When humans see an elf for the first time, they usually have only two reactions. Most are captivated by our beauty, while a rare few powerful ones become nervous because of our deep mana. But Your Highness, you're neither of those. Hearing that, Jung Am quickly blocked Glenn's reaching hand. "I just have unusual taste. An elf like you isn't my type." Glenn's expression instantly turned ugly. Clearly, she wasn't pleased with his answer. Then she put her cloak back on and turned to leave. Jung Am thought he had finally escaped disaster. But to his absolute horror, that crazy woman showed up at his bride selection ceremony the very next day. After Jung Am took Arwen and Demacia as his personal knights, rumors had spread all over the royal capital that he was using the title of knight as an excuse to build a harem. So the queen had specially arranged this ceremony for him. But the candidates were more ridiculous than the last. There was even a little girl who could barely walk. And there was also a muscle-bound beauty who looked even stronger than Jung Am. At that moment, Glenn led the elven delegation in for an audience. She bowed gracefully. "We elves offer our highest respect to the beautiful Queen Margaret. I heard His Highness is selecting a lady worthy of becoming his princess consort." Hearing that, Jung Am knew something was wrong. This crazy woman was definitely plotting something again. Glenn continued, "I'm a high elf of the Elven Kingdom. From a human perspective, that's equivalent to being born into a noble house of high status. And, truthfully, the first time I saw Your Highness, I felt that our fates were tightly connected." Hearing that, Jung Am was shocked. Elves never lied about their own fate. So did that mean what Glenn had just said was actually true? Queen Margaret, standing nearby, was shocked by Glenn's bold confession, yet also visibly pleased. From her perspective, this elven woman was indeed the perfect match for her son. The nobles began whispering among themselves, discussing whether the kingdom was about to form a marriage alliance with the Elven Kingdom. Seeing the situation getting out of control, Jung Am quickly stepped down from the platform. Then, he walked up to Glenn and grabbed her wrist. "We need to talk alone." With that, he dragged her straight out. But his actions only confirmed the noble's suspicions. It looked like the kingdom really was going to form a marriage alliance with the Elven Kingdom. After bringing Glenn into a private room, Jong-am directly questioned her about her real purpose. Glenn smiled and said, "I only came to deepen the friendship between the elves and the human kingdom. Why are you so guarded? Wouldn't having a beautiful elf like me as your bride be a wonderful thing?" Jong-am stopped pretending and directly exposed her identity. "I'll ask you one more time, Elder Class High Elf Glenn. As the executioner of the Elven Kingdom, did you come here to investigate, or are you here to carry out an assassination?" She hadn't expected Jong-am to know her true identity. Then her aura turned cold and sinister. "Since you know I'm an executioner, shouldn't you understand that staying silent is how you survive?" Jong-am knew very well that his current self was no match for this monster, so he had to make her even more interested in him. Only then would Glenn consider him precious enough not to just get bored and toss aside. So, in the face of Glenn's threat, Jong-am acted completely unfazed. "Stop playing games, Glenn. Don't interfere with my fate." And, just as Jong-am expected, Glenn's expression stiffened slightly. The next moment, her eyes lit up as she stared at him, pressing him again and again about who he really was. Jong-am said that right now, he was nothing more than a pitiful prince with a terrible reputation. But Glenn kept circling him, studying him closely. "Then what's the real you like?" Jong-am didn't answer directly. He only said that if she was interested, she could wait and see. Glenn said softly, "I kept wondering why I was sent to carry out such a trivial task. Now, I finally understand. All of this was fate guiding me." Hearing that, Jong-am felt a massive headache. Whether it was 400 years ago or now, Glenn was still the same terrifying lunatic. After that, the two of them returned to the banquet, hand in hand. Seeing them openly act so close in public, everyone was stunned. Jong-am directly said to his mother, "From now on, I'll be engaged to Glenn." The moment he said it, even Jong-am felt speechless. He never imagined that one day he would be calling Glenn's name in such an intimate way. But for now, a marriage alliance was the only solution. At the very least, it could buy him more time. Only later did Jong-am realize that he had still underestimated this insane elf. Escaping from her grip was basically impossible. When the third prince heard the news, his face turned red with rage. That useless trash hadn't only won over the commander who controlled the kingdom's northern border, but had also taken Arwen from the strongest knight order under his command. And now he was even going to marry that beautiful high elf. What right did he have to deserve a woman that stunning? So the third prince secretly decided that in the upcoming duel, he would strike hard on purpose. He couldn't directly get rid of Jong-am, but if he took the chance during battle to cripple him below the belt, Jong-am would never be able to live a normal married life. Soon, the duel between Jong-am and the third prince officially began. The person overseeing this duel was none other than the captain of the Royal Knights. The third prince still thought Jong-am was the same useless fool from before, as if defeating him would be easy. To humiliate Jong-am, he had even invited the powerful figures of the royal capital to watch. But Jong-am only yawned. Dealing with this brat was a complete waste of time. He might as well finish this quickly and move on to real business. Seeing that, the third prince's face darkened. This arrogant bastard actually dared to look down on him. In a moment, he would make Jong-am regret ever accepting this duel. The next instant, the third prince fully activated his mana chains and charged at Jong-am. Jong-am said calmly, "I was going to play with you for a bit, but unfortunately, I've been busy lately. So let's end this fast." Then Jong-am brought his sword down with unstoppable force. Right after that, the third prince, who had charged in with such fierce momentum, collapsed miserably to the ground. The nobles watching were all stunned. The third prince was recognized as a genius in the royal capital, while the first prince had always been a spoiled wastrel. Yet one casual swing had defeated him. Even the powerful captain of the Royal Knights was dumbfounded. Was this really the first prince he knew? That strike just now was something even he might struggle to block. Then, the knight captain announced to everyone, "The third prince has lost consciousness and can no longer continue. The winner is His Highness, the first prince." After the duel ended, Jong-am had no intention of staying. He simply turned and walked outside. To him, this fight had been as ridiculous as watching a child throw a tantrum. And this battle quickly caused a huge stir throughout the royal capital. No one expected the third prince to lose. He was the kingdom's most promising two-chain knight, yet he'd been defeated by the first prince, who had only trained for a few months. After a long while, the third prince finally woke up from his unconscious state. When he realized he had been knocked out in a single move, humiliation and rage flooded through him. He roared, "Bring me my weapon right now. I'm going to fight that bastard again." But his personal knight told him that after the duel ended, The first prince had already left the royal capital with Count Berahard, and their destination was the Count's family territory. Most likely, it was so His Highness the First Prince could fully take over the kingdom's northern forces. Meanwhile, although his uncle was pleased, he still asked curiously, "The royal banquet only just ended. Why are you in such a hurry to leave?" Jung-am said that the royal capital no longer had any place for him. Those ridiculous nobles had already sided with the hostile empire in large numbers. So compared to nobles, knights and soldiers were actually much better targets for Jung-am to recruit. But his uncle still thought Jung-am was being too reckless. After all, he had just formed a marriage alliance with the Elven Kingdom. Right now, deepening that relationship should be the most important thing. What his uncle didn't know was that Glenn was exactly why Jung-am had rushed out of the capital without stopping. Because if he delayed even a little longer, he might actually end up marrying that crazy woman. If he stayed in the peaceful royal capital, Jung-am's growth would be painfully slow. Only the conflict-ridden north could truly sharpen his blade. At that moment, his uncle suddenly noticed Jung-am shivering from the cold and asked why he didn't go into the carriage. Jung-am said that he would be staying in the north for a long time, so sooner or later he had to adapt to this freezing environment. And more importantly, if he stayed with that old man, his uncle would start nagging him non-stop about studying again. Then, Jung-am suddenly froze while looking ahead. He had noticed that Arwen's complexion was off. Clearly, she wasn't used to the climate here, so Jung-am suggested that she rest inside the carriage for a while, since the road ahead would only get colder. But Arwen stubbornly insisted on guarding his side. As a knight, how could I step back for my own comfort? Seeing Arwen insist, Jung-am didn't force her. Instead, he felt genuinely pleased in his heart. Although the journey was harsh, Arwen still looked full of motivation. The complete opposite could be said for the members of the Royal Knights. They were all gloomy about being transferred away from the royal capital. Seeing this, Jung-am thought that if Carl were here, he would be able to manage these knights properly for him. Unfortunately, before they left, the king had warned Jung-am that the royal knights weren't his personal knights. Carl and the others in particular had even started placing Jung-am's orders above royal authority. So they couldn't follow Jung-am farther north. This was exactly what made him sense that something was wrong. Even if the original owner of this body had committed many awful acts, the king's attitude was clearly excessive. There had to be a story behind this that Jung-am still didn't know. Not long after, a massive blizzard suddenly struck. Their voices were swallowed by the storm, making it almost impossible to hear one another. Seeing this, his uncle used mana to issue orders to everyone, telling them to temporarily abandon unnecessary heavy items and leave the area on foot first. Hearing his uncle use mana just to shout his orders, Jung-am immediately realized that this blizzard was anything but normal. So he quickly called out to Demacia inside the carriage. Then he supported her as she climbed down, preventing the fierce wind from knocking her over. At that moment, Arwen also hurried over and asked Jung-am if he was hurt. Jung-am said that he was fine, but the royal knights who had been sent with them looked like they were in serious trouble. So he told Arwen to take care of Demacia. Then Jung-am stormed toward the knights and snapped, "You idiots, throw away those shields already. With wind this strong, are you trying to get blown away? From now on, stop clustering together. Everyone line up in a single file and move forward slowly." Seeing this, the northern knights nearby were surprised. Wasn't this His Highness's first time here? How did he know how to move through a blizzard? After that, the group pushed through the snowstorm and slowly advanced. No one knew how long they had been walking when someone suddenly collapsed. "Your Highness, this is bad. A soldier has passed out." After hearing that, Jung-am quickly pushed through the crowd and walked over. Then, he lifted the soldier onto his back, preparing to carry her as they continued forward. Jung-am coldly urged them, "What are you waiting for? Move." After walking for who knew how long, they finally saw a towering castle ahead. Jung-am couldn't help grumbling that this damn blizzard could have stopped earlier, but no, it had to wait until they reached their destination. Soon, his uncle arrived before the castle gate. The knights behind him immediately raised the family banner. Count Berahard, ruler of the northern border and commander of the kingdom's 3rd Legion, sincerely welcomed His Highness the First Prince to the eastern fortress. This winter fortress was a stronghold built specifically to resist invasions from foreign races. To nobles who had spent their whole lives in comfort, this place might seem unnecessary. But it was precisely because the people here endured such extreme conditions year after year that the kingdom had remained safe for 100 years. At that moment, a young man who somewhat resembled his uncle stepped out. He bowed respectfully and said, "Welcome back, Count Berahard. I, Vincent Berahard, hereby step down for my position as acting commander." Only after saying that did he finally smile. "Welcome home, father." His uncle also patted him on the shoulder with relief and told him he had worked hard while he was away. Jung-am couldn't help laughing. "I didn't know you had a son, uncle. Looking closely, the two of you really do look alike, especially that stubborn attitude. He's exactly like you." Hearing that, Vincent's expression darkened slightly. This first prince really was as spoiled and reckless as the rumors said. The Eastern Fortress was a place where countless people had given their lives for a noble cause, not a playground for some spoiled prince to wander around with several women. Vincent simply couldn't understand why his father had brought someone like him here, so he quietly asked his father what exactly had happened. To his surprise, his father said that he had already decided to become the first prince's guardian. In other words, their entire faction had fully sided with the first prince. But Vincent still couldn't help advising his father to be careful. After all, the king had always viewed the first prince as a burden, and even his father had once been completely disappointed in him. But Count Barrowhard merely looked at Jong-am's back and said slowly, "People change, don't they?" Then Count Barrowhard continued to Vincent, "I'm telling you to put aside your prejudice and look at His Highness the First Prince again." Vincent agreed on the surface, but his eyes still showed clear disdain and disgust toward Jong-am. After that, once everyone entered the council hall, the Count asked Vincent how the monster-clearing operations had progressed during this period. Vincent reported respectfully, "Father, although the number of monsters has been steadily decreasing, there are still some areas we haven't managed to fully clear. In particular, nearly 20 orcs are currently occupying the entrance to the Blade Mountains." Just as Vincent suggested, selecting knights to eliminate them, Jong-am slowly walked out from behind him. Then, Jong-am picked up the piece on the map that represented the orcs and said calmly, "Leave this matter to me." Seeing this, Vincent and the others quickly tried to stop him. Those orcs were no ordinary enemies, and if they were alerted, it could affect the Rangers' next operation. When Jong-am saw that none of them agreed, he simply turned to his uncle. So, Count Barrowhard directly asked how many orcs there were. Vincent answered, "According to the information we have gathered so far, there are at most 20 orcs. We haven't found any orc warriors or witch doctors yet, but we can't conclude that there are none." After hearing Vincent's report, his uncle turned to Jong-am and asked if he was confident. Before Jong-am could answer, Vincent became anxious first. He frowned and said, "That area is one of the main routes used by the Rangers. If we fail to wipe them all out in one strike, more orcs will surely gather there in the future, turning it into a war zone. And if anything happens to His Highness, the Barrowhard family's position will become even more difficult." Count Barrowhard said in a deep voice, "Vincent, I understand your concerns, but I'm willing to believe in His Highness." Then, he asked Jong-am what he needed. Jong-am said he first needed a guide familiar with the terrain, then better equipment for his men, and preferably a few more crossbows. Hearing that, the knights of the Eastern Fortress looked at one another. Trying to deal with orcs with only that much sounded like a pipe dream. And when the royal knights sent by the king heard the news, they immediately panicked. They hurriedly said, "Our mission is to protect His Highness. Shouldn't clearing out orcs be the 3rd Legion's responsibility?" Jong-am said he had already decided to kill the orcs. If they were supposed to protect him, then they could come along. Then he told them to go to the 3rd Legion to receive weapons before reporting back to him. Jong-am took the chance to check their personal information. Although these knights had performed poorly during the earlier blizzard, they were still knights directly under the royal family, so their basic abilities were quite outstanding. However, one of them had a trait that looked very much like he had been sent to monitor Jong-am. The next day, Jong-am discovered that the guide was actually Vincent. Suppressing his anger, Vincent tried to persuade him one more time. "Your Highness may not understand how serious the consequences will be if this operation fails." Jong-am calmly replied that there was no if, because he wouldn't fail. At that moment, Jong-am discovered that he couldn't view Vincent's information. That meant Vincent was at least a 3-chain knight, and the people behind him were clearly far from ordinary as well. They were obviously elite knights disguised as common soldiers. It seemed they planned to bypass Jong-am and personally eliminate the orcs, but Jong-am didn't expose them. This time, he hadn't allowed Demacia to follow, because if her insane traits were triggered too early, things would become troublesome. Soon, Jong-am and his group set out toward the Blade Mountains. Along the way, Vincent kept rattling off warnings and instructions, nagging even harder than his father. Then, a frightened rabbit suddenly darted past up ahead. An experienced knight immediately took out a spyglass to scout the area. He soon discovered several orcs hunting ahead. Then he used hand signals to report the situation and asked Jong-am what they should do next. Jong-am directly ordered everyone to prepare for battle. Right after that, he walked straight toward the orcs. Jong-am said coldly, "It's been a long time, you damn bastards." While the orcs' attention was drawn to Jong-am, the hidden group immediately launched a crossbow ambush. Jong-am drew his sword and charged straight at the orcs, thrown into chaos. In a single instant, he cut down one of them. That long-lost familiar sensation almost intoxicated him. As the nearby orcs surrounded him tightly, Jong-am only grew more excited. The scent of the battlefield is incredible. In his previous life as a sword, he had slaughtered countless savage races, perhaps billions of living beings. But after being reborn as a human, this was the first time Jong-am had killed a monster with his own hands. Arwen, standing nearby, wanted to rush in and support him, but Jong-am shouted for everyone to stay back. Because the move he was about to use was extremely powerful, and one mistake could injure his allies. Countless ages ago, humanity hadn't yet become the ruler of this continent. The entire world had been occupied by orcs, and in that era, there was a pitiful man whose name never made it into history. To honor his father, who had fought the orcs until dying from exhaustion, that man personally created the revenge hymn, a hymn filled with endless killing intent. The next moment, Jong-am's killing intent condensed into a blood-red figure, like a vengeful spirit. His personal knight, Arwen, was stunned by the sight. She never expected Jong-am to have such a crazed side. When Jong-am activated the revenge hymn, his figure gradually overlapped with that warrior from the past. In his memories, that warrior carried endless hatred toward orcs. He spent his entire life slaughtering orcs who invaded human territory, as if no number of dead enemies could ever extinguish the fire of his revenge. During Jong-am's long life as a demon sword, countless wielders had gone down in history through overwhelming strength. That man, however, had mediocre talent and left no trace in the history books. But through that insane thirst for revenge, he became the absolute nightmare of countless orcs. In his short life, even after the mana in his heart had long dried up, he never once stopped taking revenge on the orcs. And back then, as the demon sword, the only thing Jong-am could do was burn away every last bit of the man's remaining life force to fulfill his final wish. At first, that man had only been a powerless scholar. But one day, when he returned home, he found his house in ruins. His beloved wife and young daughter had vanished, leaving behind only bloodstains. To let the souls of his wife and daughter rest in peace, the man walked the path of revenge every waking moment. Finally, after who knew how long, he found the one who had slaughtered his wife and daughter. By then, however, his body was already covered in wounds, and even his life force had been pushed to its absolute limit. But facing an overwhelming gap in strength, he still showed no fear. He drew the demon sword without hesitation and charged at the orc with a roar. Even if the orc before him was the king of its tribe, even if he himself was already on the verge of death, the only thing left in his heart was revenge. But no miracle came. His all-out strike landed on the orc king, yet it failed to leave even the slightest wound. Instead, the orc king simply caught him with one hand. The next instant, he was slammed brutally into the ground, the terrifying force cracking the earth beneath him. Even though his life had reached its end, even though his body had been shattered beyond repair, he never once thought of giving up. Until his final breath, he kept murmuring that he would continue his revenge even in his next life. And he was the composer of the revenge hymn, a tragic man who had never been praised by anyone, whose name had never even been known by the world. At this point, the only one who could still remember all of that was probably Jong-am. When Jong-am finally snapped out of his memories, he found broken orc corpse. Then his attention was drawn to the sounds of battle in the distance. The soldiers, who had originally been low on morale, were now fighting the orcs with blazing determination. At first, when they had come to hunt the orcs, their faces had been full of reluctance. And after arriving on the battlefield, they had been terrified by the enemy's massive bodies, cold sweat running down their backs. Especially after trying to fight them, they realized the orcs' physical strength was almost absurd. At that moment, Arwen stepped in just in time and quickly rushed to the front. With one unstoppable slash, she cut off an orc's arm. Looking at the terrified soldiers, Arwen said coldly, "This is a battlefield. If you want to live, don't lower your weapons." But even after everyone prepared themselves to fight, facing the charging orc force, Arwen still felt an intense sense of danger rising in her heart, because she could tell that with just these people, it would be extremely difficult to handle these enemies. Then, all of a sudden, an overwhelming killing intent swept across the battlefield. What happened next shocked everyone present. Even Arwen, who had the strongest nerves among them, widened her eyes in disbelief, because they saw Jong-am standing alone, as if he had surrounded the orcs by himself. A terrifying killing intent wrapped around him, so dense it almost seemed physical. And through the endless slaughter, Jung-am suddenly realized that the revenge hymn was still an unfinished epic. He had to write its final chapter himself. No one knew how much time had passed, or how many orcs Jung-am had killed. The earth itself seemed to be dyed red with the enemy's blood. And at last, the revenge hymn revealed a new verse. Green corpses piled into mountains, ahead a blood-red pawn shall be born, and before it, I shall offer your soul in tribute. Then a surging wave of blue mana erupted from Jung-am's body. The revenge hymn also evolved into the soul requiem hymn. Jung-am couldn't help looking toward Vincent in the distance. Vincent broke the orc banner, raised it high, and announced to everyone that the orcs had been completely wiped out. The next moment, everyone threw their arms into the air and cheered for victory. Jung-am looked at the heir of this border family, the man standing on the front line against monster invasions. And he realized that Vincent not only shared the same name as that person, but even the look in his eyes carried a faint resemblance. Maybe it was only a coincidence. Or maybe Vincent really was the reincarnation of Jung-am's old friend. Before Jung-am could think too deeply, Vincent respectfully handed the banner over to him. He said, "The tradition of the 3rd Legion is that the bravest soldier in battle receives the enemy's war banner. It's an honor no other trophy can replace. And in this battle, Your Highness killed the most orcs. Without question, you're the true owner of this trophy." Jung-am hadn't expected Vincent, who had always been at odds with him, to praise him openly in front of everyone. At that moment, Arwen spoke from behind him. "Your Highness's brave fighting greatly lifted our morale. We offer you our highest respect." Then all the knights bowed to Jung-am in unison. Jung-am looked at these comrades who had just fought beside him through blood and battle, and a powerful sense of belonging and glory surged in his heart. He raised the orc banner high as a symbol of victory and cheered together with everyone present. After that, they sent off their fallen comrades with fire. Even knights who had survived countless battlefields couldn't help shedding tears. Vincent comforted everyone, saying that these losses were already very small. After all, the enemy had been an elite orc combat unit. Arwen said that even so, it was still heartbreaking. But Vincent gave a bitter smile and said, "Let the lives of orcs comfort the souls of kings. For those who fell, victory is the best mourning we can offer." Hearing that, Jung-am's expression sharpened. His old friend from his previous life had once said the exact same thing. If this was a coincidence, it was far too perfect. The name, the way he acted, and even the words he occasionally spoke were all exactly like that man. Seeing everyone's mood sink, Jung-am joked, "By the way, do we really have this many people when we set out?" Hearing that, Vincent and the others immediately looked embarrassed. So the nearby rangers just happened to pass by and came to support them? What an incredible coincidence. But from Vincent's expression, it was obvious he hadn't trusted Jung-am's strength at first, so he had secretly sent a large number of knights to follow them. Who could have guessed that Jung-am would be the fiercest killer on the battlefield? After that, Vincent seriously suggested that they return to the Eastern Fortress immediately, because the appearance of this orc combat unit was far too abnormal. Even the highly skilled rangers had failed to detect their traces at all. And even stranger, why had they come here in the first place? When they returned to the Eastern Fortress, his uncle, who had already heard of their victory, was already waiting for them. And Jung-am raised the trophy in his hand without hesitation. Seeing this, everyone immediately burst into cheers. "His Highness is incredible. He captured an enemy war banner in his very first battle." Meanwhile, Arwen and the others looked a little embarrassed. At this point, His Highness had already shown that banner off 11 times. Did he seriously not get tired of it? At that moment, after hearing his son's report, Jung-am's uncle also became serious. He said, "You've just returned from battle, and I wanted to let you rest properly. But the situation is urgent, so we no longer have that luxury." Then he took Vincent and headed toward the council hall. But before leaving, Vincent suddenly stopped and looked at Jung-am with a very strange expression. After hesitating for a long while, he finally managed to say, "You fought well, Your Highness." Seeing this, Jung-am's face filled with confusion, while Arwen behind him smiled and explained. Vincent was probably just embarrassed because his attitude toward Jung-am had changed so suddenly. Just then, Jung-am suddenly heard someone calling him. He looked toward the voice and saw Demacia rushing over in a panic. She asked anxiously, "Your Highness, are you hurt? I was so worried because I couldn't go with you this time." Jung-am called her name with an extremely serious expression. And in the very next second, he lifted the banner again and started showing it off. That night, Vincent delivered the contents of the meeting to Jung-am, saying that they would next select elites to enter the mountains and investigate why the orcs had appeared. Jung-am asked with a confused look, "Didn't you hate the idea of me getting involved before?" Why are you taking the initiative to tell me about the meeting now? Vincent said he was simply following the Count's orders. Only then did Jong-am understand. His uncle wanted them to build a better relationship. After all, no matter how they looked at it, the two of them were cousins. After Vincent left, Jong-am stared at the banner and fell into a daze. He had been too absorbed in the previous battle because it was the first time he had fully used a martial spirit hymn. In his previous life as a demon sword, he had possessed countless unbelievable powers, but those powers didn't fully belong to his current self. Only through the baptism of the battlefield could he truly turn them into his own martial spirit hymns, just like how the revenge hymn had evolved into the soul requiem hymn. At that moment, Jong-am was suddenly drawn by a faint sound. He noticed a white crow outside the window. When Jong-am got a clear look at it, he was instantly startled, because that definitely wasn't an ordinary bird. It was a magical beast. Looking at the eerie shadow that had suddenly appeared before him, Jong-am guessed that it had to be sent by that crazy woman. Sure enough, in the next second, a familiar voice rang out. "My dear fiancé, how have you been lately? Did you like the gift I sent you?" The moment Jong-am heard the word gift, he was startled. Connecting it with the strange incident from earlier, he immediately had a clear guess. No wonder an orc combat unit had suddenly appeared in the valley. So all of this was Glenn's doing. Hearing that, the white crow tilted its head back and let out a piercing laugh. Then Glenn's voice rang out. "I only wanted your highness to meet a suitable opponent. I hope you'll gladly accept my kindness." Jong-am's face instantly darkened. This crazy woman really never cared about consequences. Because of her little whim, dozens of rangers had already died at the hands of the orcs. She made it sound nice, but in reality, everything she did was only to satisfy her own twisted, voyeuristic urges. Elves were born listeners and reciters, a race forever unable to create hymns of their own. And precisely because of that, they had an almost insane obsession with hymns. Earlier, when Jong-am used the revenge hymn while slaughtering orcs, and ultimately evolved it into the soul requiem hymn, Glenn's heart had been deeply satisfied. So, she gave Jong-am a piece of information. Deep within the mountains slept an extremely ancient orc. If he killed it, he would surely compose an incredibly powerful and magnificent hymn. But Jong-am didn't yet know that this was the very enemy, his old friend from his previous life, the creator of the revenge hymn, had spent his entire life failing to defeat. After delivering the information, the white crow's body suddenly twisted. The next second, it exploded and vanished completely. That crazy woman still had to disgust him one last time. Clearly, Jong-am running away from her before had made her hold a grudge. Although Jong-am knew that Glenn had told him this information purely out of selfishness, this time, he decided to give her what she wanted. After all, creating an even grander hymn would allow his strength to evolve further. Before setting out the next day, Vincent warned him carefully that while the rangers could move freely through the mountains, that only applied to the outer regions. Once someone went deeper, survival was almost impossible. Hearing that, Jong-am asked in confusion, "Has no one really ever come back alive?" Vincent nodded helplessly. "We've sent countless elites deep inside to investigate before, but none of them ever returned. So our mission this time is to intercept those monsters. Don't go deep into the mountains." But instead of fear, Jong-am's face was full of anticipation. In his previous life, the knights who sought to reach the realm of heroes and myths had nearly slaughtered every taboo existence in the world. But it seemed there was still one hidden here. Seeing Jong-am look eager to try, Vincent warned him again. "Don't even think about entering the depths of the mountains." Jong-am waved his hand and said he understood, but deep down, he had already decided he absolutely had to go. Of course, Jong-am wasn't reckless. He knew that with his current strength, dealing with that ancient monster would probably be difficult. Even though he wanted nothing more than to charge in right now and cut off that thing's head. Before that, he needed more battles and victories to write his hymns. Just then, the alarm for an enemy invasion suddenly rang out. The knights all rushed toward the walls, clearly already familiar with how to respond. When Jong-am arrived on the wall, he saw his uncle commanding the soldiers to stand ready. Then his uncle gestured for Jong-am to look in a certain direction. 3 rangers were running toward them in terror, as if something monstrous was chasing them. The soldiers on the wall watched the distant enemy situation while anxiously urging the rangers to run faster, because the orcs riding black giant wolves were about to catch up to them. If they could move just a bit farther and enter bow range, the soldiers on the wall would be able to help block the orc cavalry. But both his uncle and Jong-am sensed that something was wrong. These orcs were clearly toying with them. With their speed, there was no way they couldn't close such a short distance. At that moment, one of the fleeing rangers suddenly stopped. He realized that if they kept running like this, all three of them would be wiped out. So he gave up his chance to escape, drew his sword, and faced the enemy alone to buy time for his two comrades. Seeing this, the soldiers on the wall shouted desperately, "You idiots, don't stop, just run a little farther." But in the blink of an eye, that ranger was devoured by the wolf. Seeing this, the other two immediately drew their weapons, determined to avenge their captain. But the overwhelming gap in strength had already sealed their fate. The wall fell into complete silence. Watching comrades they had lived and fought beside die right before their eyes, the soldiers were filled with grief and rage. His uncle explained to Jong-am that this was a common trick used by orcs. If they sent soldiers out to rescue them, the orcs would wipe out the rescuers along with the victims. Vincent also agreed, saying that fighting monsters couldn't be judged by common sense. They absolutely couldn't act rashly. If the defensive line collapsed, the entire kingdom would be trampled by orcs in an instant. Then the alarm suddenly rang again. The wolf riders had returned. The lead wolf riders slowly approached, bringing one of the rangers with him. The soldier in charge of scouting the enemy's movements turned pale, because he discovered that the ranger was still alive. Then, an orc radiating an extremely sinister aura walked out while holding a banner. It stomped forward and let out a thunderous roar. Seeing this, Vincent quickly asked his father if the orcs were about to carry out an execution. Jong-am placed a hand on Vincent's shoulder and said, "This isn't an execution. They're requesting a duel." In his previous life as a demon sword, Jong-am had been able to understand the orc language. From the beginning, that orc had been roaring, "I demand an honorable battle. For the great Ting, I'll reclaim the name of our legion." Hearing that, a cold smile appeared on Jong-am's lips. It seemed the ancient being Glenn mentioned, the one sleeping deep in the mountains, was the king of the orc race. In that case, he could finally avenge his old friend. Jong-am finally stopped hiding his mana. The instant he moved, even the orc general felt a chill run through its body. The knights who witnessed this broke out in cold sweat. They never expected this spoiled prince to possess such terrifying strength. Not long ago, the orc army had pressed toward the fortress. Jong-am, who had once been a demon sword, understood the orc general's language. He realized they intended to use a hostage to force the kingdom's side into a duel. But his uncle and Vincent both looked unconvinced. After all, Jong-am was the infamous first prince who had always been known as useless and ignorant. How could he possibly understand the orc language? So Jong-am decided to prove it with action. He slowly walked toward the edge of the wall. Then, in the same language, he answered the orc general, accepted the duel request, and ordered the rest of the orcs to retreat 200 meters away. Hearing that, the orc general was stunned. "How can a human speak our language? Could it be that you inherited the noble blood of our race?" Jong-am instantly cursed in anger. "I'm the proud first prince of humanity. How could I possibly have the filthy green blood of your kind?" In the end, however, the orc general accepted Jong-am's request and agreed that each side would send out 5 fighters for a duel. Jong-am then turned back to the others, explained the rules of the duel, and asked if they finally believed him now. But his uncle and Vincent still looked unconvinced, saying that from the start, Jong-am had only been muttering some strange language, and they'd no idea what he was saying. But, in the next second, his uncle's expression changed sharply, because the orc army actually retreated 200 meters as a group, leaving only 5 powerful orcs standing in place. In all his decades guarding the border, his uncle had never seen anything like this. Jong-am then explained the exact terms of the duel. Their side would also send 5 people, but only those who had fought in the previous mountain battle were allowed to participate. Hearing that, his uncle wasn't too surprised. It seemed that because the orc unit from earlier had been wiped out, they were demanding this duel for revenge. So his uncle quickly confirmed the first participant. Vincent was his only son, and had guarded the border with him for years, so his strength was naturally among the best in the group. The other rangers also rushed to volunteer, because they all wanted to avenge their comrades who had died earlier. But Jong-am stepped forward and stopped them, saying that these 5 orcs were no ordinary enemies, so they should leave this to him and his people. Hearing that, everyone tried to persuade Jong-am not to participate. After all, he was the kingdom's first heir. If anything happened to him, the consequences would be disastrous. But Jong-am had already made up his mind. These green monsters were perfect fuel to strengthen his soul requiem hymn. And although his personal knight, Arwen, remained serious and quiet, the desire for battle in her eyes was impossible to hide. After receiving Jong-am's permission, Arwen immediately swore that she would win victory for him. Only then did his uncle finally ask, "Where exactly did you learn the orc language?" "I've lived most of my life, and this is the first time I've heard of anyone communicating with orcs." Jong-am brushed it off by saying he'd learned it from books. and that orcs normally didn't communicate with humans anyway. This time was just special, because the orc general was using an ancient language that only those who serve the race's king could learn. Jong-am couldn't help sighing inwardly. There were far too many coincidences in this world. Ever since he'd been reborn as a human prince, the elves, who rarely interacted deeply with humans, had sent an envoy. And the leader of that envoy was his forward teammate from his previous life, someone who clearly had designs on him. Now, even the orc king who hadn't appeared for 400 years was about to awaken. Soon, Jong-am and the others arrived outside the fortress, ready to duel the orcs. The orc general looked at him and said, "I never expected my opponent to be you." Jong-am asked, "What? Are you dissatisfied?" To his surprise, the orc general let out a savage laugh. It said, "Your presence is among the finest I've ever seen among humans. Killing you will surely crush humanity's morale." Jong-am found that almost funny. People had always underestimated him, yet the first opponent to truly recognize him was actually an orc. Beside him, Vincent saw that Jong-am was about to duel the orc general. He was just about to stop him when one of the orcs launched a surprise attack and cut him off. Two orcs riding giant wolves charged forward with fierce momentum. Seeing this, Arwen quickly rushed to Vincent's side as well, making sure he wouldn't be outnumbered. Jong-am, on the other hand, looked completely unsurprised and said calmly that orc duels were nothing like knightly duels. They didn't follow some orderly one-on-one sequence. With that, he raised his sword and charged straight at the orc general first. Jong-am leaped high into the air and lifted his sword above his head. In the next instant, he brought it crashing down toward the orc general. But the orc race, famed for its overwhelming strength, was never going to fall so easily. The orc general suddenly exerted force and sent Jong-am flying on the spot. After that brief exchange, Jong-am immediately realized the situation wasn't good. This monster was absolutely no ordinary opponent. It was probably not far from reaching the hero realm. The orc general let out a savage grin. "What a shame. Compared to the pressure you gave off, your actual strength doesn't seem all that impressive." Hearing that, the corners of Jong-am's mouth slowly curled into a cold smile. Then a wave of blue mana began to spread, only to erupt in an instant, forming a strange domain where crimson and blue intertwined. That energy quickly expanded and covered everyone standing on the fortress wall. At that moment, all the hatred and disgust they felt toward the orcs were transformed into strength for Jong-am. The fate mana that had originally been formed from Jong-am's soul requiem hymn swelled in an instant into a terrifying power. Then, Jong-am raised his sword and pointed it at the orc general. "Looks like coming here was exactly the right choice. Next, you'll become a sacrifice for my soul requiem hymn." The moment those words fell, Jong-am's aura exploded, and his strength surged dozens of times over in a single instant.